Hi, welcome back to the 30-day journey to 30. Today is day 16, and we're going to continue talking about courage by facing and embracing our shadow. So I've got quite a few things going on today. I'm going to try and keep it organized. First, what is shadow? Two, what are the different sides of shadow? And three, how do we bring it all together? So first things first, what is shadow? I found this really great definition online, and it is the shadow is the side of your personality that contains all the parts of yourself that you don't want to admit to having. Yes, I think that's so succinct. Your shadow is everything that you wish was different about you. Your shadow is everything that you hide about yourself. Your shadow is everything that you dislike and don't want about yourself. That's your shadow. But it's important to recognize that it's still part of you. And to dive a little bit deeper, to dig a little bit deeper, our shadow normally comes from two places, our inner critic and our childhood programming. And we're going to look at both of those. So first, inner critic, because we've got that. That's a thing. It happens all the time. It's telling us how awful we are. It's telling us how miserable, how wrong, how badly we've messed it up. Like the inner critic is always there telling us how awful we are. Luckily, we have this book. We have The Courage Habit by Kate Swoboda, Kate Courageous, as she's known online. And she brings up a really great aspect of the critic. So on page 103 of her book, it literally says, the big secret about the critic. And I'm about to reveal it to you. Just lay it all out. Here's the secret. Can't be in the shadow anymore. Here's the big secret about the critic. The critic is invested in a fear routine, and it won't go away just because we want it to. It thinks that by criticizing you, it's protecting you. Underneath the condescension, shape-shifting, malicious logic, yelling, berating, and intimidation, the critic is in fact scared. It's scared of change, and it's scared of doing things differently. It's scared of living differently, experiencing rejection, and dealing with failure. That's a good word to mess up on. It's scared of dealing with failure. The critic is not out to get you. It's wounded, and it's trying to protect you from future wounding. It's from that wounded place of fear that the critic starts to criticize you, hoping that if you stay in the old, familiar routines, you'll be safe from any harm. Yes. And I think that's exactly where a lot of us end up getting these shadow parts, is that we have this wounded side of us that is so worried about our safety and our belonging and our need to succeed that it wants to support us. Like it wants to take care of us. It wants to see us succeed, but it doesn't know how. It's kind of like our critic is our best friend who really doesn't understand communication skills. Like it doesn't understand interpersonal communication. So the critic is there to support us, to show us what it's afraid of. But a lot of times we end up taking what the critic says and we turn it into our shadow. My critic says I'm not good at public speaking, so I should probably not make these videos. My critic says that my teeth are really crooked, so probably never going to make videos as a life coach. My critic says this. And so then you start listening to your inner critic instead of saying, like, you know what, I hear you. Thank you for being afraid for me. Let's talk about this a little more. We're like, yep, that's something that's awful about me. Let me just go ahead and hide it so the rest of the world can't see it. And essentially we're literally taking a piece of us, like our hand or our arm, and we're saying, oh yeah, that's not a very pretty hand. We should chop it off. Like we should just not have a hand. Actually, you know what? That's kind of ugly too. We should just not have an arm. We should just. And what are we left with? We slowly get rid of all of who we are because we're not quite understanding our inner critic. Because Kate goes on to explain, I see the critic as being the part of us that is interested in survival at all costs. For as loud as it can be, it's actually incredibly insecure and afraid. It sees going after your dreams as a terrible threat, one that could come with rejection and feelings of failure. So, The critic is going to do whatever it takes to avoid those experiences, even if it means speaking to you in ways that are abusive to stop you from taking a risk. It's trying to keep you safe, but it has lousy communication skills. I've made a commitment to set boundaries with my critic rather than ignore it, or attack it back, which is so important, right? So it's important, one, not to ignore the critic, just say like, go away, critic, I've chopped off my hand, we don't need to talk about this. And it's important not to fight back with it, like, no, I am right. People will love me because of my crooked teeth. Arr! It's not going to work for a connection, which is another very important C. So the critic is often a huge place of our shadow. Another place that we have our shadow is childhood programming. And we're going to head to a different book. I know I've talked about this one before. Late is the New Black by Rebecca Campbell. So we're going to head to this book and see what she has to say about childhood programming. On page 85, titled The Fear of Being Seen, we have experiences, often stemming from childhood, where we decided that our authentic self was not enough. A significant moment when we decided that it was safer, easier, less painful to shine a little less. We decided to dim to fit in. We don't need to have a conscious memory of these experiences for them to still affect us today, and that's true. Our soul carries imprints from lifetime to lifetime, which hold wisdom gained from lessons learned, as well as past traumas that are waiting to be healed. We are here to heal those traumas that are standing in our way and preventing us from stepping into our most authentic selves. When we step into our authentic power, we are unafraid, we are courageous to let go of we are unafraid of letting our biggest authentic self be seen, regardless of who is in front of us. So, just to complete the whole chapter here, the little section, and work your light, which is her recommendation. It says, think back to a point in your life when you consciously decided that who you were wasn't enough. What happened? What does this younger version of you need to hear now? So a lot of times, as I mentioned before, our shadow comes from either our critic or our childhood programming. So those moments in our life where we started to lose our like young, exuberant, curious, bright-eyed childhood and started saying, I can't be my real self here. And you did the same thing. You were like, people don't like my hand. I can't be authentic here, so let me just not have a hand. We're not a whole person when we do that. So both of these instances, the critic and our childhood programming, are both things that it's important, one, that we face, and two, that we embrace them, right? Because by taking in what the inner critic or what our childhood programming says and trying to make us less, trying to dim ourselves, trying to chop off the pieces that don't fit, isn't authentic. We're less whole when we do that. Okay, so that's the inner critic. That's childhood programming. They're both parts of our shadow. And one last book, Choose Wonder Over Worry by Amber Ray. She summarizes all of this so nicely. So I've mentioned before in her book, it's titled Choose Wonder Over Worry, which is basically choosing curiosity, choosing examination, and like, I wonder why people don't like my hand. Over worry, being afraid of failure, listening to our inner critic too deeply. And this is, just let her speak for herself. Meet wisdom. Up to this point, we've made a great case for wonder, the courageous, curious, and compassionate. Those are all part of the 7 C's. The courageous, curious, and compassionate part of us that guides us through our worry myths to unlock who we truly are and what we have to offer the world. And when we do that, it's when we learn to turn toward our emotions, be kind to ourselves, and live a life that is more strongly led by wonder than worry, that we are introduced to another voice, wisdom. Wisdom is the part of us that sees value and wonder's grand and glorious plans with worry's more watchful and careful eye. Wisdom is adept at hearing what worry has to say without spinning into panic, while simultaneously tuning into where wonder's curiosities are pointing. Wisdom knows that it's not an either or. or a game of right and wrong and good and bad. No, it's an and. It's a holding of both. It's a reverence for all of our contrasting and contradictory parts. Because while worry without wonder is paralyzing, toxic, and unproductive, wonder without worry, wonder without our childhood programming, wonder without our inner critic, is impulsive, overacted, and usually overcommitted. That's where wisdom comes in. When wisdom runs the show, worry and wonder respect each other, move as allies, and walk hand in hand in the direction of what is most aligned and true. It's called the union. I like that. I like that it's called the union. That's awesome. Everyone should be whole with a union inside of you. The union is when we welcome fear, sadness, grief, shame, joy, heartbreak, vulnerability, and unworthiness to all have a seat at the table of our heart. It's when we invite every part of us that we've denied, repressed, or abandoned to come forth and join us, not so that we can fix it, or make it better or overcome it, but so that we can acknowledge it and embrace it lovingly for what it is, an aspect of who we are. When we do this, we tap into a wellspring of creativity, connection, vitality, and flow. This is the place from which our greatest contributions, deepest connections, and most profound experiences emerge. This is the place from which we return home to who we are. So, yeah, beautiful, right? I love the way she summarizes that. So we've talked about your shadow self. We've talked about how your shadow self comes from both your inner critic and your childhood programming, and how ideally you get to a place of wisdom where you have wonder and worry. You listen to your inner critic, you're examining your childhood programming, and you're accepting of all of it. You're not trying to chop off pieces of you. It's very robotic. You're not trying to chop off pieces of who you are. You're not trying to hide pieces of who you are. You are authentic and whole and amazing. I added that last part. You are amazing. I think so. So I know I just threw a lot at you. I know I just read a bunch at you. That is the next part of practicing courage, being able to take everything that your inner critic says, everything that has been programmed into you since childhood, accepting all of these aspects of your shadow and embracing them so that you can live a life filled with more wisdom and more union and all of the words that Amber Ray said. So that's shadow. Tomorrow we're going to dive more into abundance. And I know we've talked about well, I guess no is kind of nice because we talked more about yes than no when we talked about no. We've talked about saying no. We've talked about facing your shadow. Tomorrow we're going to talk about embracing abundance, because I think this is another area that a lot of us, me included, get hung up on. So I will see you there.